Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to part 3 of Defending the Defense Industrial Base webinar series. Part 3 features Ezra from Duo Security and Sam of AvePoint Public Sector. They're going to be discussing multi-factor authentication and zero trust in the defense industrial base and backing up GCC High for CMMC compliance. After that, we're going to have a short open forum Q&A, which will be moderated by Levi from NeQter Labs. There is a Q&A section built into this, into the WebEx, so please feel free to ask all the questions you want throughout the presentation, and we will answer as many questions as we can at the end. Once we finish, we'll wrap everything up. We do have a lot of information to cover today. This is a little bit of a change in pace. We're going to dig deep into the technical aspects of CMMC. So at this time, I will turn it right on over to Ezra.
Hey, great. Thank you, Tim, and appreciate BDO and the rest of the Sonia and Gabe as well for hosting not only today but the series, and also to Levi for being the master of ceremonies here as well and keeping us on track as we move forward and cover some information here. So I have a quick introduction. My name is Ezra. I have sales responsibilities with Duo and have been with the company for almost 4 years now and specifically focused on federal ICAM. And so today we'll cover, and I'll talk about how that really applies to the defense industry base as well and what we're seeing there. So for everyone joining today, also thank you for attending. If you're not familiar with Duo, Duo was a company from Michigan that from Ann Arbor, my hometown actually, and has since been acquired by Cisco in 2018. So we're now part of the Cisco security portfolio in the cloud sector. So the reason Cisco really looked to Duo and wanted to bring us on is because of the zero trust architecture and the way we approach the kind of modern perimeter in security and focus on not only MFA and multi-factor authentication as that foundation for zero trust, but applying a lot of dynamic policies around that to be able to support these modern environments and hybrid networks, hybrid user bases, different types of devices, et cetera. So we'll dive into that throughout the presentation today, and also talk about some of the kind of key components that really made Duo as successful as it was when it comes to being user focused and now being backed by the NIST frameworks when it comes to the identity guidelines for 863 and 171, as well as SP 207, which just released in August, which is the zero trust framework. So we'll cover some of those tidbits as well. Next slide, please. So to kick it off with, we like to set a little kind of groundwork as far as that modern perimeter and what that looks like and how that's really changed. And traditionally, it's that between four walls tight network where everything's managed internally, the databases, servers, and users. So there was a lot of trust associated with that. With access for the user base within that moat per se. And now that's changed, right? So we have different types of users, different types of resources, cloud, on-prem, mobile, different types of employees. There's an icon in the bottom right-hand corner that's poor edit on my end, but should be contractors and vendors as well, and people that need access that is outside of that traditional perimeter. So how do we address that, right, from a security perspective and making sure that not only the users are who they say they are, but that the devices that they're using in a not only if it's not a company issued device or a government furnished equipment, that there's an expectation that there may be personal devices accessing networks and applications as well. So how do we enforce the security components and measures onto that? Next slide, please. So there's a few building blocks when it comes to the zero trust journey, and it's not a zero trust isn't a product or anything that really is off the shelf and available. It's more of a philosophy in the way we approach security. So it comes down to an inherent, not inherently trusting devices and users based on who they whether they're connected to the network or whether they have access to a specific application. So these building blocks specifically address that. One, by the foundation is multi-factor authentication and confirming user identities, and then taking that a step further and gaining access visibility into the devices themselves, as well as making sure that the devices are up to a secure, hygienic standard, enforcing some policies around that. So there's context around the users themselves, and then making sure that every application is protected from a multi-factor standpoint. Next slide, please. So to address some of the building blocks, confirming user identities, this is really that foundation in making sure that the users are who they say they are, and that can be done a variety of ways. And in Duo being a kind of modern approach to that allows security teams to have some flexibility in how they deploy an MFA for their user base. And so Duo has set up a variety of methods to be able to do this. So there's a mobile app ultimately that Duo is available in the app stores that can be downloaded, which will have a FIPS validated token that is generated through that out-of-band push notification. And that's very critical as we kind of talk about compliance to 171 and specifically 863 3B, where it talks about types of authenticators that are included in that framework, and in the push notification being one of them, which is available to its iOS store and Android store as well, the Google store. So that's a great way, especially as many users have mobile phones, and those are typically users have those in their pocket generally. That's been usually our kind of most used authenticator option. Beyond that, there's a set of options as well when it comes to security keys, like a YubiKey, for example, or a Google Titan key that can also kind of up level the authentication from a AAL2 authenticator up into a AAL3 authenticator as well. Those are great for very user-friendly authentication methods because the access to the phone. Security keys are great because it's a tap of a haptic, gets you right in, and generates that FIPS validated key. And then there's also hardware tokens that we see a lot of DIB customers using in SCIFs where a mobile phone or security may not be allowed. So there's options there. There's also mobile passcodes within the app itself, and bypass codes as needed, and then kind of forward-leaning web authentication methods as well, as browsers begin to adopt that passwordless authentication method. So we also offer SMS and telephony in our commercial edition, but we also have a FedRAMPed edition of Duo, which is sponsored by an ATO, Department of Energy, that specifically addresses these authentication methods. So there are options beyond that, depending on which route is best suited for your needs. Thanks. Next slide, please. So getting a little bit more specific and into what it means in after that MFA occurs, and Duo is an agentless service. So there's no agent really deployed on the devices themselves, but through hooks in the mobile app as well as the browser. After that second factor is completed, Duo will has the ability to deploy some policies around that, and that's determining the access visibility. So gaining some device insight into whether the OS is up to date, whether the browser is up to date, determining whether or not Flash or Java is accepted, for example. Next slide, please. And then that kind of third building block in looking at making sure a device has a secure hygiene associated with it as well, also takes it a step further in making sure that a device has biometrics or screen lock enabled, that disk encryption is enabled as well. So there's some options there. Next slide, please. And then there's the fourth step of contextual policy that really looks at who that user is and where they are, what type of roles does that user have as they gain access. So as we've outlined, there's specific user group policies that Duo can set for those user accounts. So if you have a subset of users that need privileged access, you can apply different policies to those users across the user base. So there's a lot of flexibility there. You can kind of pinpoint which users needs access to specific applications. So if there's executives that need access to sensitive resources, you can set policies and make sure those users only have access to those resources. Where, hey, a contractor needs access to the HVAC system, they would only get access to that. Or if Ezra was only allowed to gain access to the breakfast menu, they would absolutely apply that policy and make sure that's contextualized around that specific user. There's also a good way to allow users to be engaged in that security process, and that's where we kind of go back to a little bit about that kind of user-focused way to gain access. So there's, when it comes to engaging that user in the security process, and that's been a big way to make security more enabled for the users. So when people are engaged in security and it's easy to use, it's more likely they'll actually use it as opposed to finding ways around it. So one feature we have is a self-remediation tool that administrators can set up, wherein if a browser is out of date or if there's a 0-day vulnerability, for example, administrators can block access completely until those browsers have been patched and updated, which Duo will guide the user through that process. So it will reduce help tickets and ultimately allow that user to say, like, hey, yeah, I'll go through those steps and bring awareness around that. So when we address things like CMMC and general practices around overall security hygiene, it's important to engage those users in that process. So it's less of a burden and more of a, hey, we're doing this because not only is there risk associated with it, but it's something that doesn't have to be hyper painful. So next slide, please. And the kind of final building block here is securing access to all applications. And this is wherein Duo, being agile as a cloud service, being able to protect applications at the application layer, is able to protect cloud resources, on-prem resources, mobile resources as well. So really, when we kind of look at the DIB, and from what I've seen working with this community over the past couple of years, is that it's really focused on a couple of use cases. When we look at Windows logon, RDP, VPN access, and there's also a whole kind of myriad of applications that can also be incorporated with MFA. So, and the way that works is through SAML connections, broadly speaking. So Duo only prompts for that second factor when the primary authentication has successfully been completed, and only when. So by being able to connect with really any identity source, whether it's cloud or on-prem LDAP, Duo will pause that auth process upon that successful primary completion, and then prompt that user for that second factor. And that can be done at an application-specific level, or integrated as well with a single sign-on, so your users have access to all the applications that they need in one place, or at a individual application layer. Next slide, please. So when we look at Duo and from a logical perspective, it really becomes the glue between the users' devices and that applications. So it's a way to really consolidate different MFA methods that you may have deployed for different reasons. And MFA is not necessarily a new thing per se, right? It's been deployed for a long time. And it's, especially in the federal government where we focus, they've been the kind of early adopters of MFA, right? And now that the landscape's changed a little bit, we're looking specifically at how do we consolidate that and really take 5 or 6 flavors of MFA and make it a little easier, not only from an administrative perspective, but from that end user perspective as well. So Duo in kind of the focus, and because we specifically and only do authentication, have the ability to be that glue in that relationship between the user's devices and infrastructure. Next slide, please. So as we take a look, and there's been a lot of interest from the DIB community and kind of how Duo is addressing this, and CMMC is here to stay ultimately, right? So how do we approach that and address it accordingly? I don't really want to spend time kind of digging into either the domains or specific controls. I think those are outlined as far as where MFA is relevant. But ultimately, there's capability to use Duo across 9 different domains, as well as depending on how you leverage the Duo service, up to around 28 controls outlined within the CMMC structures. So NIST specifically, when we talk about the digital identity guidelines and what they're requiring there, Duo is really built a product, and some may argue kind of led as far as how NIST approaches authentication. But when it comes to closely aligning with those 863B authenticators, really makes a easy compliance check when it comes to, hey, we're using Duo for authentication on our Windows logon machines, and because of that, we've had kind of feedback from our DIB community where it's like, hey, the auditors will accept Duo as an authenticator for that, and there's really no kind of additional documentation as to leveraging a non-FedRAMP service, for example, or verifying whether there's FIPS encryption enabled, because that's already built in. So the way we address our DIB customers is really by creating that service that's can cover a breadth of domains as well as controls. Next slide, please. And I'll close it out. I think I might be coming close up on time, but to take a look and as NIST has recently released their zero trust framework, and what that looks like, there's a lot where Duo is applicable here. So, and while this may not be necessarily within CMMC requirements, there's definitely a trend here. So as the DIB community is supporting federal clients and kind of having that understanding of where multi-factor authentication sits in that zero trust architecture and how that's being deployed and leveraged, it can be very advantageous, especially if there's ICANN projects and for the systems integrators out there that can leverage Duo for those use cases. So if people haven't dug into that and there's interest around really the framework and the NIST guidance around zero trust, highly recommend reading that document. It's not like a multi-volume NIST document. It's pretty concise as far as kind of how they address it, and there's many specific call outs, not only to MFA but specifically to dynamic policy control. And this is something that's very well suited for and accessible for the DIB community to really start thinking about and progress in a forward-leaning way. Next slide, please. And I'll close out with a couple use cases, and this is where we'll see kind of a very common types of use cases, right? So with most companies likely on this call have satellite facilities throughout the US, and in order to manage that and having something that you can help manage those types of different networks, different locations, et cetera, hybrid networks. So there's a very kind of specific call out to these types of use cases that Duo could help address as well. Yeah, I don't think I need to go through kind of all of them, but there's yeah, I'll just close it out there. So thank you. I'll pass it over to Tim or Levi.
Hey, thanks for all that, Ezra. At this time, we shift gears a little bit and hand things over to Sam to kind of take through, back for.
Perfect. All right. Can everyone hear me all right? Oh, perfect. I'll take that as a yes. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time. BDO as well for having me speak here today. We can move on to the next slide as a bit of an introduction. So what I want to talk about is, a little bit about AppPoints and our ability to back up, GCC high. Working in the DIB, with these customers now having these new CMMC requirements, one of the biggest things is how do we maintain this information and ensure that we have, reliable backup and storage options. So to start, my name is Sam Valme. I've been with AppPoint about 7 years. I used to be the public sector engineering manager. I worked on our services side for a little while. And backup and recovery has actually been something that's been near and dear to my heart. I'm not sure if anybody in the audience has ever used a tool called Dell Aperture, but that was one of the things getting started that I started off my engineering career. So it's been quite a journey when it comes to this backup and recovery story. Feel free, if you like as well, to hit me up on LinkedIn. Go ahead and add me. I will say, ensure you do Sam Valme Jr. My dad is a senior, and I do not have a PhD in policies and administration or whatever he got. So just make sure you're adding the right Sam, and you can definitely continue the conversation via LinkedIn. We can go ahead to the next slide and then give you a bit of an introduction. If you haven't heard about AppPoint, what it sounds like is we can go ahead and give you a bit of a high-level introduction of our company and organization. And the idea is that we've been around since 2001. If we want to go to the next slide, that'd be fantastic as well. Perfect. Yeah. AppPoint's been around since 2001. We are a global organization. We have around 15,000 customers and 6 million concurrent cloud users as well. So really our breadth has been in originally the SharePoint story, leveraging our Microsoft partnerships as well. We have a ton of experience when it comes to administrating workloads in Teams and SharePoint. And we've really expanded that when it comes to our public sector business. It's one of our largest businesses, and we really double down that focus on ensuring that we're meeting not only the needs of our customer base in the cloud, but that we're also meeting the needs that are specific to security and compliance for highly regulated industries. Also, we ensure that we meet all the necessary standards of having US-based citizens only with our applications and installing things like our SaaS solutions in Azure Gov as well. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide, and I can give you a bit of an introduction on some of the questions we should be asking ourselves when it comes to assisting some of our customers in Office 365. It's the idea of, backup and recovery is not just a press it and it's on. We have to ask some questions about what are we actually protecting against? Do we understand our native options? And what's the real challenge that we're facing in the industry and the market that we should be overcoming? One of the big things that you also need to consider is, do you have a backup and recovery strategy that scales? If you're using, or if you're used to having customers saying, oh, I just need to have a tape backup on premise and I should be good. When it comes to, online assets, especially being so accessible, you really want to make sure that as you continue to grow and expand, your customer's footprint, that they have an application on the back end that is going to scale with their business needs without having to hit pause on growth and order more, SQL disks for additional storage locations. So we can go on to the next slide and talk about, a bit about what it is that AppPoint actually does. So let's talk about some initial considerations, for your customers. So the next slide here, as everyone is, fully aware of, CMMC is a big regulation coming out. It should be finalized, later this year. But one of the biggest things that we're going to be talking about is this need for offline backups, and offline and reliable backups that are regularly tested. So this adds an opportunity for consumers like yourselves of SaaS-based solutions to now have, sweeten the pot by also hitting these marks. But ISVs like AppPoint, what we want to do is we want to make your jobs easier when it comes to defending these customers and working with them. So what we're going to offer is a fully SaaS-based solution that's going to allow you to alleviate some of that back-end need of having to maintain those servers, maintain those disks, and make it as easy as possible for you to get access to this information. When a customer has an issue they have to process or restore, an easy-to-use interface for you to go ahead and get that information back. Okay, so we can go ahead and move on to the next slide as well. And from here, let's talk about what are some common data loss environments, right? The reality of it is, we continue progressing the slide here. The challenge is really going to be from a user and administrator perspective. So I misplaced the document version's corrupted, or I had this particular planner tasks, or from an admin perspective, I've updated the app and the sites, or I have broken inheritance permission, or a user left a couple months back and we forgot their retention policy to get that set up, or we didn't add them to the right group. These are really the common things that occur when you're talking about administrating your customers' environments. While yes, large instances of an entire site being locked out due to an outside actor is definitely a possibility, the more the day-to-day challenges are what's going to take up the time of the admin staff of having to really process these tickets. So these are the things that as you're working with your customers and understanding, you want to get an understanding of how often these have occurred. How are they handling challenges like this today? And what are those RPO and RTO retention periods that they need to meet internally for their SLAs? And of course, documenting that information for your customers will make things very transparent when it comes to looking for an outside solution to meet the needs of the organization. And then you should also consider what you're getting out of the box with Microsoft today to ensure that they have an understanding of what's available. And then they also see, when is it appropriate for us to use the recycling bin versus when it's appropriate for us to open up a ticket with our managed service provider to get this information back. All right. So moving on to the next portion of the slide, we can go ahead and talk about some of those native capabilities, right? So, out of the box, you have, of course, your version control, you have your recycling bin, and of course, that deleted email as well. But then we have, the larger aspect, which is deleting sites, having your retention periods, being able to, contact Microsoft directly with a 24 to 48-hour response time for that ticket. And then, of course, potentially a week to 2 weeks of actually getting that information back. When you talk about that recovery time objective, how fast you need to be able to get information back online, if you're talking about the out-of-the-box capabilities for a critical error, especially when you have executives on the phone trying to get access to content, some of the out-of-the-box SLAs just might not necessarily meet those criteria, which is why asking the question of what those standards should be is so important and having that documented for the organization. Moving on to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about some of the research that's been done by folks at Forrester when it comes to how Microsoft actually views what's the responsibility of Microsoft and the customer. And they've made very clear when it comes to service loss, things going down or natural disaster at the data center, right? Or even some of those short-term pieces, they're absolutely going to be able to help out and jump on those immediately because you have either a wide system outage or you have things that can be easily restored with the out-of-the-box capabilities. But when it comes to the customer's responsibilities, that's going to be a bit more nuanced, right? So if you lose access to your information due to an outside actor, right? If you have instances where data is no longer available due to, whether it's going to be, the retention period not being met or your employees not having an activated account, those kind of nuanced conversations are where Microsoft really says that's the customer's responsibility. And you really want to have an outside tool that's going to provide some of that capability back to you. So, especially layering on top of the CMMC requirements and keeping those offline backups, it's no longer really a question of do we need to have a backup solution in the cloud? It's really, do we have a vendor that's going to meet all of our particular needs? All right. Next slide here. We can take a look at, of course, I might be biased, but I think it's one of the better solutions on the market when it comes to backup and recovery. We can go into the next portion. And what I want to do now is just give you a bit of a glimpse and a window into our solution over here at AppPoint. So it's a fully SaaS-based solution located in Azure Gov, so we meet those FedRAMP moderate requirements. We are also, the previous presenter talked about DOE, doing their ATO. We're also in our ATO process for a fully FedRAMP service, which we'll be getting by the end of the year as well. So we do have those boxes checked. And when your customers log into the solution, they're going to be able to see, a really simple, clean interface and looking at all the different assets we can back up. So Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, Groups, Teams, Project Online. And we are staying up to date, releasing as many updates, up to monthly. Staying up to date with the capabilities and APIs that are available from Microsoft to restore your backup content, ensuring that you always have the latest and greatest in a solution. Moving on to the next slide, we can see, and I want to walk you through just a bit of what the experience looks like when it comes to, looking at this application. So we're going to be able to click on any of these different workloads, and you can see here on the bottom of the screen, get an idea of how often we're taking these backups and when the next one's been scheduled. By default, when you connect and authenticate to your tenant, we're going to begin taking backups up to 4 times a day. So every 6 hours, and you can go ahead and drop that back down for your customers that don't, necessarily want as long of a retention period. But what we're also able to do is we're able to give you a number of different options when it comes to how that information is being stored. So by default, we do have, AppPoint storage in our GCC data centers. But we also have what a lot of our current customers supporting customers in the GCC are taking advantage of is what we call the bring your own storage option. So what that means is you can leverage our application to do the computes, to do the connection, to capture that information, and we can actually store those backups in a GCC high Azure Blob storage as well. So keeping all that information in one location if they'd like, or if, for some reason they would like to have that information stored back online via an SFTP, or if you want to move that information over to Amazon, you can work with your customers to really ensure they have the best practice in place to get the secondary copy of their content that's available. Okay. Moving to the next slide, we can talk about some of the recovery features. Right. One of the biggest things that you're going to be working with your customers on is ensuring that you have a way to restore this content. So this is just an example of the restore operation. So here we're typing in the name of a particular user, and you can also see below we have a number of different options when it comes to searching for that content, levels of detail. So document all the way down to the item level. I can go ahead and search for the document's name. I can search for a range of when that document was restored. If I want to restore an entire site collection, I have that capability as well. So we can do a really easy search with this interface to make sure we're dialing into the very specific content that we want to go ahead and bring back. If we go to the next slide, what we're going to be able to see from here is once we've found that particular document, you can see I have all my refining search criteria at the top. I'll be able to simply go ahead and select that information, and I can see the recovery point that I'm restoring it back to. You'll also notice that that's a drop-down option, and I can go ahead and open up, and if I want to restore earlier versions or copies of that content, I can do that as well. So giving me that level of granularity, especially when it comes to those individual item level restores. All right. Moving to the next slide, we're going to be able to see the next portion, which is what does the restore actually look like? And one of the biggest things is going to be having all that metadata really preserved and maintained. So this is going to be, some of the benefits to, as opposed to using the out-of-the-box capabilities, as opposed to rolling back your entire OneDrive to get an individual document back once it's outside of the recycling bin. I can move that document with AppPoint's system and have it put back in full fidelity, not losing any of my metadata and having that information fully preserved. All right. So to the next slide, we're going to be able to talk about some of the other aspects. From here, one of the things that we like to, really dial in on is security is some of our number one concerns, and making sure that we have our application installed in, the Azure government data centers, and ensuring we give the options for our customers to do things like bring their own storage, but also bring your own key. Now, by default, the content as it's being backed up and stored with our solution is indeed encrypted. But if you would like to use your own key with an Azure Key Vault, you can provide that to us as well. So you can have that double level layer of security. I should note that when it comes to the backup and restore, nobody at AvePoint, even all the U.S. citizens that we have working with our application to make sure it's up and running and functional, will have access to any of your customers' content. So that's something that's really good to know. And you can have that bring your own key option just to double down on that knowledge. Going to the next slide. One of the things that I would also say is, you really want to challenge any vendor in the marketplace to ensure that they do have a cloud operations team. So not only the folks that are managing the solution, but also the folks that are supporting the solution, so that nobody really has that access to your customers' content, especially when you're dealing with folks that are supporting the DoD environments. You want to have that level of confidence that you're not going to have any type of leaks from your SaaS-based provider. All right. So these are just some questions to ensure that you're asking as you're doing your initial evaluations for a partner when working with these customers. Moving to the next slide. The next thing you want to also challenge is the organization itself, right? So at AvePoint, we do have our ISO 2700100 certification, which we can go ahead and reference here. And this is something that we took great pride in actually getting internally, which is, the outside verification from a third party that we are taking advantage of the latest when it comes to security practices. And we ourselves are holding our information to a higher standard. So as you're in the industry, these are the kind of things you're looking for from a vendor that are going to differentiate, and give you that peace of mind that we're handling your customers' information securely from a solution perspective, but also internally, we kind of, practice what we preach with how we hold our own information. So definitely a question to ask any outside vendor that you're planning to work with your GCC high content. All right. Moving to the next slide here. Let's just do a bit of a brief recap. So fully SaaS-based backup and recovery solution. We're going to be backing up to 4 times a day. Like I mentioned, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Exchange, Project Online groups. We also have, Dynamics, and that becomes available for your customers, available as well for the backup assets. We have granular restore capabilities in place and out of place if you would like, so we can restore it back to where it needs to be natively, or we can also do that restoration to an outside tenant if you wanted to restore to a different tenant in a GCC high, or if you want to just restore to a different site or site collection, we can do that as well. And then really it's that ongoing visibility and control of that content. So that high level dashboard that we saw at the very beginning. And if anybody wants to take more of a deep dive, we have more detailed reporting about how different users are actually using the application at the organization. So you can see where you may have, increase in trends of folks storing more and more in your cloud-based solution. All right. So on to the next slide. I believe we should be coming to, just a bit of words about some of the folks that actually use. And as we were putting this together, BDO New Zealand actually happened to be one of our case studies. So I had to put that right there in the middle. But we have a wide variety. This is by far our most popular application when it comes to, users. It's something that everybody really sees value in. We make it as simple as possible. And even the folks of DBO New Zealand, they were one of our premier case studies as well. So I think being so integrated into the community, global scale is important, But even when it comes to some of the agencies that are really focused on ensuring this GCC high data is maintained properly, we also, ensure we have everything we need to have taken care of there as well. All right. So moving to the next slide, I believe. Yep, that's all from my part. So we'll move over to Q&A.
And this is Levi here. Just wanted to say, great job, Ezra. Great job, Sam. I know you guys shared a lot of information. We've been receiving questions throughout the entirety of the webinar. Anybody who wants to throw in any more questions, feel free. We're going to try to get to as many of them as possible. And thank you again, Tim and BDO, for setting this up for us. It's really excited to talk about CMMC and share this information. So for the first question, I'm actually going to toss this one over to Ezra. But can Duo be beaten by an attacker in any way for Windows login? For example, I know you can disable Duo for Windows login by booting into safe mode. Are there any other ways that end users should, monitor for or try to prevent?
Hey, Levi, thanks, and thanks for the question. There's ways we'll address that, right? So if you so as long as Duo is installed and if you're booting in safe mode and that doesn't recognize the Duo installer or doesn't require that primary authentication into the machine, that would absolutely be a excuse me, potential attack vector there. So when we look at options and ways we would approach getting around a multi-factor, I think that would bring us back to where we consider social engineering as well as phishing attempts to be able to potentially either could potentially bypass 2FA if it were in like a fail open mode, for example, if the machine was set that way, or if there was some sort of compromise to the SIM on the device itself, or if you're using Duo to leverage potential SMS or a phone in that case, which is not necessarily an out-of-band authentication request, right? So by making sure that Duo is used in a way that can prevent certain attacks, whether it's through compromised credentials, which is a big focus of ours, and saying that, hey, there's phishing attempts constantly and obtaining those credentials if there were to happen. How does that second factor prevent adversary from gaining access and bypassing that 2FA, and that's by specifically leveraging those out-of-band authenticators, where we can strongly mitigate that risk to address Windows logon there. So there's potential. It depends on kind of how you have that set up, of course, but ultimately having 2FA on the machine and making sure that the users that your user there is leveraging that functionality in a way you deploy would ideally mitigate any sort of phishing or social engineering attempts there.
And I know I heard you. You mentioned SIM in there, which naturally, being with a SIM vendor myself, that always gets me excited and actually leads us right into the next question. But can Duo actually export their own logs into SIM so that you can keep track of everything?
Oh, yeah. Let me clarify, Levi, that what I meant by SIM is like the SIM card in a mobile device or some sort of compromise to that. If there were a potential attack surface there, that would be compromised as well. When we look at addressing logs and more of the export functionality to address the 3.3 controls in 171, yes, absolutely. Duo would be able to export those logs and allow necessary reporting to meet those controls as well. Great
Awesome.
Question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it is a great question. And I know it's something that, we're working on our end, being a SIM vendor. So moving on to the next question, which I'm actually going to toss over to Sam. But can AvePoint back up other targets other than Office 365, say, for example, VM or Azure?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So today it's going to be the main ones I talked about. So it's going to be your teams, groups, OneDrive, SharePoints, and staying up to date with those. I will say that we are expanding out to other cloud platforms in the future. I can't give too many details right now, but I would definitely say Q1, stay tuned. And if you're talking about things, I see the question here with VMs, definitely take a look at some of the out-of-the-box things Microsoft provides in Azure. We have a lot of customers currently using our backup solution. And one of the things that they've said is that they're having a lot of success with those out-of-the-box recovery capabilities when it comes to Azure VMs. So yeah, that's an excellent question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I know, like you said it yourself, Microsoft's doing a lot, helping out everyone with CMMC compliance. And I know this is something they're keeping top of mind. We're actually going to have Richard Wakeman on in 2 weeks talking a little bit about what Microsoft's doing. So keep an eye out for that event. But leading into the next question, Sam, I'm going to toss this one again to you. But at the point, do you guys have a DFARS compliance migration solution for the Office 365?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a wide variety of vendors, MSPs that are leveraging our migration solution today to move their customers into GCC High. And we do meet many of the DFARS control families, audit and accountability, media protection, the incident response, those kind of pieces. We meet a lot of those different requirements, not all of them necessarily relevant for our migration solution. But what I would do is I would definitely recommend taking a trial of the application and see if we offer, the high enough level of reporting necessary for your level of comfort. So yeah, we do meet many of those recommendations and qualifications out of the box.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I know, especially with DFARS, it gets a little bit complicated. So hearing that you guys are doing out of the box is amazing. Tossing the next question back over to Ezra, but with Duo, can a user register multiple authentication devices?
Yes, absolutely. So the Duo system, it allows an amount of flexibility to control which users either have specific access to use specific authenticators that you allow or disallow, as well as allow a self-service functionality as well. So ultimately, what that does is when that second factor occurs, when the Duo prompt, which is a iframe after those primary credentials have been accepted, there's some options there, and those options will either be predetermined by the administrator or allow the user to enroll as many devices as they would like. So that could be their mobile app, either on a phone or a tablet, as well as security keys or the token fobs as well. So there's a variety of methods, and we don't necessarily limit what that would be. It's really really up to what are the policies and what will help best protect your organization. Thanks, Levi.
So yeah, no, of course. And Ezra, I know you mentioned tokens with that, which actually right into the next question, but someone asked specifically, can D100 tokens be used with Duo Federal?
Yeah, so appreciate that question, and that's that one is going to be a no ultimately. So there is so because Duo has multiple editions, and I chuckle a little bit just because this question clearly comes from somebody that either has those tokens and has definitely been using Duo for some time now, and those D100 tokens are a Duo branded token that our commercial edition supports, the enterprise edition supports, and when those are purchased, what happens is Duo will upload those seeds to the console itself and send those out to the users. So because that is out of our FedRAMP boundary in us as a OEM to upload those seed files, those D100 tokens would not be supported directly through us. However, not necessarily advised from a security perspective, but you could potentially transfer those seeds to the FedRAMP tenant and reconnect those tokens as a possibility. Otherwise, the D100 tokens are very similar to any. So really, the bottom line is the SHA-1 compliant HOTP or SHA-1 compatible HOTP token would work. So if it's a matter of, hey, we just want to use the same tokens, or whether or not the question is kind of a foundation of which type of token would work for the federal tenant, the FedRAMP tenant would support any specific SHA-1 compatible HOTP token. Thanks, Levi.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer and provides a whole lot of clarification. Next question I'm also going to toss to you again, but does Duo deploy endpoint agents to determine device visibility?
Yep. So we do not, and that's been some good positives. So Duo doesn't operate similarly to like a MDM where you'd have like a container or a heavy agent deployed on the device itself. So Duo functions specifically as an agentless service, and so the way we'll connect and be able to apply those policies and determine that device insight is specifically related to having the mobile app installed on the device itself, as well as the browsers. So on the workstation itself, when the user goes into the application or SSO, that browser will provide the necessary information we need to deploy those user policies based on those browser hooks.
So Ezra, it looks like that last token question actually set off a bunch more. But going off of the same frame, taking it back to tokens, will the YubiKey 5C PIV smart card PIN number work with Duo Federal MFA?
YubiKey 5C PIV. So typically, YubiKey's supported. I kind of like to refer to us as chocolate and peanut butter because we work so well together. So those 5Cs, those can also be kind of FIPS enabled as well. Those will absolutely be supported, and those are something that can be registered. When it comes to specific, maybe I haven't come across the kind of the PIV smart card PIN number. When it comes to leveraging PIV as an authentication method, that is not currently supported within the Duo service. There are ways we can kind of enhance the PIV authentication workflow. And this can be ultimately wherein wouldn't require Duo to do an authentication. For example, if a user goes in with their PIV card, logs into the workstation or application, without Duo having an authentication event, can still provide device insight into that workstation or device. So there are integrations available, just not from a typical workflow. We're leveraging a YubiKey or a hardware token in the same way as performing that authentication event. And this is and that's a fantastic question, and that's something we are continually addressing for our federal customers, specifically agencies and the contractors as well, as the smart cards are a well-rooted authentication method, especially as HSPD12 is well established and will be. So our integration points will continue to grow there and ideally become a official authentication method used. Great question.
So Ezra, I know you mentioned that YubiKey and Duo, you guys got that chocolate peanut butter, correlation matchup, whatever you want to go with. I might get some flack with this, but I'm actually not a chocolate and peanut butter fan. But going off of that thread, do you have any recommendations for a hardware token that would work with Duo that would also be acceptable with SEIF, say, for example, like a non-USB type?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we get into how do we support our users with a second factor in SCIF environments. And this is a very common use case, especially for our DIB customers, of course, wherein the phones or the security tokens are not allowed. So there's a number of manufacturers out there that can be leveraged for a 6-digit OTP hardware token that are acceptable by SCIFs. And that could be there's a number of them out there. So it really comes down to if I've a few customers using the Phaeton C100s. There's the OneSpan Go 6 tokens are also commonly used there. So there's I even had some customers re-provision RSA tokens to work with Duo service as well. So I think that gave them some headaches, but they ultimately got it to work. So there's a variety of options out there ultimately, and that's the best way to address the SCIF use case. And this is something that's evolving as well. So we're seeing some increasing movement as far as the acceptance of UV keys within SCIFs, and I think it's specifically agency dependent, mostly accepted for DoD SCIFs at this time. But that will continue to evolve as well as the policy supports. Hey, security tokens have the security requirements behind it. And even though they're USB, but only recognized as a firmware, like a mouse or a keyboard, that those will become increasingly accepted and require kind of less use of hardware token that may be not either FIPS or TAA, for example.
That's a great answer. And Ezra, I know you got the last few questions. I'm actually going to toss this last one back over to Sam and before we close out. But with AvePoint, can you delegate access to who can be performing the restores?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're doing the initial scans for we call them the objects. So we call it our auto discovery, scans all your different objects in Office 365. You can actually dictate different containers. So you can have the data, for instance, of OneDrive content for your executives separated from the rest of the organization. And what you can then do is you can actually give, we call delegated access and delegated permissions to different users. That way they can only see and restore content from that particular container. So that level of detail is possible. And it also makes it, a little bit more advantageous for folks that want to get maybe give like a power user access to the restore capabilities without giving them access to the entire tenant.
Awesome. And with that, I want to say one more time, thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much, Ezra, for, taking the time out of your day, sharing this information with us. Just wanted to quickly wrap up this and talk a little bit about what's coming up within the next few weeks. Next week, we're going to have another webinar next Friday, same time, 12 o'clock Eastern. We're going to be actually joined by Leslie, talking a little bit more about safeguarding CUC along with Asfa and Saeed. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about GRC with CMMC and specifically a new approach with it. And then following that up in 2 weeks, we're going to have our major culmination event to close out this series of webinars where, we're going to be joined by some of the team over at NeQter, some of the team over at Microsoft. SteelRoot's going to be there and a couple other vendors in the space talking more and more about CMMC, and hope all of you can join us.